Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't, welcome to another Northshire Presents. Thank you so much for being here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rachel Person. I'm the event manager for Northshire Bookstore in Saratoga Springs, New York, and Manchester Center, Vermont. Before we get started, a couple of quick notes. First of all, please use the Q&A box that you'll find at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions that you have throughout the evening. We will save those up and I will pose them for you a little bit later on when we get to audience questions at the end of the evening. And then before I introduce our special guest tonight, a word of thanks. Thank you so much for being here and for your incredible loyalty and support through this last really tough couple of years. Independent bookselling is never an easy business, and we couldn't be here and do events like these without the incredible loyalty and support of our customers. So thank you so very, very much. I am so very pleased to get to be the one to welcome Jennifer Fawcett to our screens this evening. She is here with us tonight to celebrate the publication of her debut novel, Beneath the Stairs, which just came out today and is a Northshire staff pick that my colleagues just adored. Jennifer teaches at Skidmore College, and her work has been published in Third Coast Magazine, Reunion, The Dallas Review, Storybrink, and in the anthology Long Story Short. She is joined tonight by author, actress, and award-winning documentarian Leslie Zemeckis. Her critically acclaimed films include Behind the Burly Q, Bound by Flesh, Mabel Tiger Training, and Grand Horizontals, which is being released next week and has already won multiple awards. Her most recent book is Feuding Fan Dancers, about Sally Rand, Faith Bacon, and the golden age of the showgirl. I'll be posting links to Leslie's book and Jennifer's in the chat in just a moment. Thank you all so much for being here, and please join me in welcoming them both to our screens this evening.
Great. So Jennifer's debut novel, Beneath the Stairs, is amazing. It takes place in a small town in upstate New York. Claire returns to her hometown after 20 years away when her former best friend Abby falls into a coma after visiting the Octagon House. The Octagon House is an abandoned house in the woods with a mysterious past. Now, 20 years prior, Claire and Abby and another friend broke into the house when they were teens. Claire escaped, but a part of Abby did not. This book is so scary. It is one of the best written creepy atmospheres ever. When I was just starting it, I didn't know Jennifer. I had to reach out and say, one, I was reading it in a house in the woods. So that was difficult. It's incredible, but it is not just about a scary house in the woods. It is about adolescence. It is about how things from our past haunt us and sometimes rule us. And before we discuss any more, Jennifer is going to read from it. You'll see what I'm talking about.
Thank you. And thank you to people who are here. It means an incredible amount. I can see things coming up in the chat, so thank you. So I am going to read actually just the prologue. I figure it's good to start at the beginning. All right. Prologue, spring. One of the girls found out about the house first. It was always this way. One heard the story and told the others, and so the secret was passed down, girl to girl, generation to generation. She heard her mother talking about it, about something that had happened there before the girl was born, something bad. This secret place still existed, hidden in the woods, waiting to be found again. And so one spring afternoon, the girl led her friends around the curve in the road where the field stopped and the woods began. Partway along, she slowed down, searching for the spot where the fence was only hooked over the nails. Easy to pull back, easy to hide. They hid their bikes just inside the woods and followed the old road. Insistent undergrowth pulled at their legs like barbed seaweed, but they kept moving deeper. Why would you build a house in here? Are you sure this is where she said it would be? Maybe it's gone now. None of them were willing to say that they wanted to turn around, that as soon as they'd crossed into these trees, they knew this wasn't a place for them. And then they tumbled into the clearing, and there, alone and asleep, was the Octagon House. They went inside. Of course they went inside. Their feet crunched over decades worth of broken beer bottles, leaves, animal droppings, and the scattered remains of garbage. All of it turned a uniform shade of dust. The girls shivered and wanted to hug themselves, but didn't. They walked carefully around the 2 large rooms on the first floor. They glanced up the decayed stairs to the second floor. They looked at the strange door, too large for a regular door and made of metal instead of wood. It must lead to the basement, they said. They wiggled the latch, but it was broken, the door firmly shut. The girls were quietly grateful for that. They wandered back into the old kitchen where they had started, kicking at the garbage, wondering what to do next. But the one who had brought them returned to that metal door. It was once dark green, but rust had spread over most of its surface, slowly gnawing its way through. Nothing stays hidden forever, she thought. And then she remembered how her mother had sounded when she'd talked about this house, that old fear coming awake again. She heard the others and turned to follow them. But just as she did, there was a click, and the door began to slide open. The air that escaped was cold and wet and smelled of earth and rot. Go, she thought. They're leaving, but her legs wouldn't move. The door opened farther, and now she could see the top of old wooden stairs. She wanted to look. She didn't want to look. She dared herself to look. Only darkness. But there on the lowest stair, something. She leaned into the doorway and looked down. She took out her phone and shone the light into the darkness, but that only made the shadows, so she turned it off again. And in that millisecond, the instant between the light and the dark, help me. The voice was inside her head, but it wasn't hers. Her friends called out to her, "Are you coming?" They were already at the door, stepping out of the grip of the house like it was nothing. She was alone. Help me leave this place. She pulled herself away and ran to them. The girls bolted across the clearing, giddy with adrenaline and release. And as they disappeared into the woods, the door shut. But it would open again. The house was awake now. She would come back. They always came back.
Yay! So let's start with the basics. Where did the idea of this come from?
Well, when I was about this age, maybe even a little younger, like 12, 13, I learned from a friend about a supposedly haunted house in the shape of an octagon that was actually in my area where I was growing up in rural Eastern Ontario. And so of course we had to go because, you know, you just have to if you're 13 and you learn about that sort of thing. I mean, how can you not walk into danger? And so we went, and I am a giant chicken. I don't go to, I mean, I've gone into all of one haunted house and wrote a book about it, and I've never gone back. Generally try and avoid scary things, but clearly it made an impression on me. I did not go into the extent that Claire, my protagonist, does in the book. I just sort of went in, but there was a feeling there. I mean, was I generating that feeling myself because of everything that I'd heard, or was there something there? I have absolutely no idea, but that stayed with me. And so many years later, a friend suggested that I try NaNoWriMo. And so I did, and I had no idea what I was going to write about, but this image of 4 girls with bikes on a summer day standing in front of this house and trying to decide whether or not they were going to cross that threshold, that sort of came to me. And so clearly that house, the real one, woke itself up in my memory and came to life. And so I just started, I completed NaNoWriMo, and then, you know, worked on and on and on. But that's really the genesis of the idea, I think, was actually really born that summer day back when I was a kid going where I wasn't supposed to go.
Now, you said you've worked on this for about 10 years. How much did it change?
True, it's changed a lot. The so in NaNoWriMo, I got, the goal of NaNoWriMo was to write 50,000 words over the course of the month of November. And I did hit 50. In fact, I think I hit 60. But I didn't have an ending. And then I was, I'm a playwright, and we were starting a theater company. And so all sorts of theater projects were coming up. And so I would pick it up and look at it for a little while, and then put it down again for a year, and then pick it up and put it down. And I think in that time, it was sort of percolating in my head. It's always been the house. It's always been these 4 girls who have gone in, and then it's always been where there's this present day story, which is really the dominant story of 2 of these girls, now women, returning, and for different reasons, and examining this question of why are they returning. But a lot of things around it have changed. I've done, massive revisions. I feel like it's not an exaggeration to say I've probably written the equivalent of another book that's, somewhere on my computer. But yeah, other timelines have changed. Really, I think it's been very much a process of sort of expanding and making the story really big, and then pulling it back in again and figuring out how to get that tautness back into it, so that there's, tension and suspense and that sort of thing.
Now, in this, you talk about there's teen trauma and how it affects these girls into adulthood. What did you want to explore or say about that? Because this is one thing I really loved about your book. It's got the haunted element, but I like how you say it's also that they were haunted, and their past relationships, and adolescent girls in particular.
I think the book really is about what it is to be haunted, but in more than just the literal haunted by a ghost way, actually even more so in a metaphorical way. The idea of being haunted, that there's by something that's happened, something that you've done, or haunted even by loss. Claire talks about a hollow place inside of her, and the part of the logic sort of who gets called to this house are women, young women primarily, who also sort of have that hollowness in them. There's something there that's missing, and it's actually kind of creating a pull. I also I didn't set out necessarily to write about mental illness, but mental illness found its way in. Before I started writing the books, a number of years, 5 or 6 years before I started writing the book, I had lost a childhood friend to suicide. In fact, I think she had been with us the day that we went into that house, and she was also on my mind. And so I think I was also thinking about, where does that come from? Where does, what the seeds of mental illness in whatever form it takes, where are they always in us? Does something sort of trigger them? I mean, that's certainly something that people talk about, is that idea of a trauma kind of awakening something. And so that kind of came in with the idea that something in Abby, who is the one who ends up in the coma, was sort of woken up in that house, which has been the connecting point. So it ended up being, I mean, again, I wouldn't set out to, I'm going to write a book about mental illness, but I feel like there's something there that kind of fits in with this house, because the house, the space, there's also been trauma there, and that has a lasting effect.
How much of you is in this book?
Probably a lot.
Like throughout different characters?
Yeah, I mean, I would say primarily in the protagonist, but there's there are little pieces of me and my direct experience all over the place, and not necessarily in the places that people would think. Just images or things that have happened or conversations that sort of find their way in. I mean, I think with, I mean, I primarily in the protagonist, in the way that she is searching. I mean, I think I'm in a much better place than my protagonist, thank goodness. But I don't know, there's something, again, it's not so much on the literal level, but it's more on, there's something kind of underneath there that I recognize maybe in her, or I mean, recognize, I made her, but you know what I mean?
Right.
And I found the same with writing plays. I started very close to home, and then sort of each one got a little further and further away. So I mean, maybe maybe with the next book, the protagonist won't be so much me, but I don't know. It would be something that I'd have to ask people who I know really well. Do they see me in Claire? I don't know. I do, but I'm biased.
How different is this for the process of it for you, the actual writing of it, playwriting and this novel? I mean, did you feel that it helped you? You know, especially because playwriting so much dialogue.
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah. I did. I mean, I think I often, I'm sure my editor could attest to this, that I had a lot of dialogue in, and sometimes I would like write a whole scene and then realize I'd get to the end and it was, oh dear, I just wrote all dialogue. Like I just turned this into a play. And so having to kind of add in the interiority. I think though, I mean, I started out as an actor. That was my initial training, was as an actor. And then I moved from there into playwriting. And I mean, you know, as an actor, you know, you're looking, it's so much about cause and effect, about why am I doing this? What do I want? That sort of thing. What's, you know, kind of pulling me forward. And so I think that idea of story was very much in my mind. But then, yeah, having to layer in the interiority was a really interesting, it was a really interesting experience. And there were sometimes definitely where I was just given the direct note, like, I need to be able to see this more, or what are they wearing? Like, I don't know. But it's very interesting because, you know, I mean, in a play, you have words and you have action. And so, and then so much lives in subtext. And I mean, I think subtext, I love subtext, and I think the subtext is in fiction as well. But what you don't have in a play is you don't have that, that kind of point of view, right? Like choosing first person or third person, that sort of thing, right? Like each actor inhabits a character with a first person point of view. That's the whole idea. And as the playwright, you're outside, but you're also, it's very, very different. So in that way, which was really fun, because thinking about, is this first person, is this third person? If I'm seeing this through, you know, the majority of the book is first person, Claire's point of view. So we are going to see everything through her eyes and be able to understand her thoughts. And that was new for me to be able, that was like a new, wonderful tool to be able to go into and articulate thoughts, and to be able to bring in memory. That was a really big thing, is this idea of being able to be in a place and then have that memory kind of spin out. And we, the reader, we can go with her on that journey. If that person, if that's a play, it's a little bit different. Either you're going to have the scene, or it's going to be a monologue, or, you know, it's different that way. So it's just sort of, I mean, I think the fundamentals of story are the same, right? But the tools that you have to build with are a little bit different. Then, I mean, the other really big difference was just that the book is just so long. It's so many words. It's a way more words than a play. You know, a play might be 100 pages, but that's like 100 pages of play script, right? Like boop,
Right.
boop, boop, double spaced. A book is, you know, suddenly I think this document was, I mean, it was 400 and something pages on my computer, which is, I mean, it's not like an atypically long book. It's pretty normal. I mean, I don't know how, you know, Jonathan Franzen does it. I, or like, you know, some people, Donna Tartt, I don't know how she, like, she have two computers or, but so there was also just kind of a logistical, technical learning curve of how do I handle all of this material? How do I hold all of this here? And how am I able to get the bird's eye view of the shape of the whole story? And
How did you do that? Do you outline? Do you write? Do you have like notes everywhere?
Yeah, notes.
Yeah.
And index. I'm a really big believer in index cards. I actually find them really useful, because otherwise, if I'm on my computer, I'm literally just scrolling up and down and like, oh, where did I find that? And I'm sure there are far more advanced ways of doing this that I'm not using, because I'm just using Word. But I love, I actually find it incredibly beneficial at a certain point in the process to kind of to divide the story into these steps on index cards, and, you know, color code depending on which character or storyline, or if I'm trying to track something with the doll, if I'm tracking the doll, right, to kind of literally put that in there. Just the process of trying to decide what goes on what card actually is a way of organizing the material in your head and thinking, okay, this fits together and this fits together and this fits together. And then, you know, I literally would just sort of like tape them up on my wall and, you know, make a big old mess that only I could understand, but that's okay. I'm the only one who has to understand it. But that way I literally could like step back and look at the shape and look at, oh, that line kind of drops off for a little while and doesn't pick up until over here. And so think about balance and how that works for tension and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, index cards. It's my high tech.
Now, one of the great things about this book, besides the prose and everything else, is really the atmosphere that you built. You know, not just in the haunted house, but also out. How do you do it? Just strictly speaking of the creepiness. I mean, because you can read a lot of books and they really aren't scary. This really, I double locked my doors. I told you, I was like running down the hallway, locking doors.
I've had a lot of people tell me that they've had like nightmares, or they sleep, or they can't go down to their basement.
Oh, no way.
And really, I'm like, me too. I mean, for me though, it's kind of like being the camp counselor who's telling the scary story around the fire, right? It's not scary for me because I'm the one telling it, but I look, everybody kind of like leaning in and then, you know, something happens and you all jump, which did happen to me a few times when I was writing it. But how did I do it? I mean, I had a tremendous amount of fun. Honestly, it was just so fun. And it was like being given permission to be that. Like, I don't know why. I wish I had a more articulate answer. I know if I ever got the note, like if Lone would say like, I think you can kind of up it here, like, oh goody, what can I add? Evil laughing.
Is your process visual?
Yes, very much. I can see. I think that's all. I can see this house now. The house of the original house that I visited is much smaller, and it's gone now. much smaller than the house that ended up growing in my mind, but I can see it so clearly, and the woods, the woods that surround it. I mean, there's also an element of familiarity there. And I love stories that take the familiar and then turn it.
Me too.
That, to me, that's the scariest thing, is take
Yeah.
something we can all recognize and then shift it so that becomes dangerous suddenly. So the woods, that idea that these woods are very dense. They've not been, they're old. There's been a lot of stuff happening in these woods, and they hold I mean, even if you just think about them like woods, there's like there's layers of leaves and sticks and years and years and years of sediment, just sort of like, on top of each. And where I grew up, there's lots of woods, and it's the sort of place that in the daytime I love going into, and you'd never get me in there in the nighttime, because again, I can't see what's here. And so I think it was sort of just basically kind of thinking about, well, what would scare me. But yeah, I tend to be a very visual thinker. So, and I don't know if that comes from theater, or if that's just who I am, but I can so clearly see every detail of this house. I know it inside and out. And so I just hope I've got it on the page.
You do. What is your writing life like? Do you journal every day? Is there, whether you're working on something or not working on something specific? I mean, have you created a kind of process?
So I would really like to say yes. I would love my answer to be, I wake up at 5 o'clock every morning and I write, 500 words, no matter what, rain or shine. But that's not the case. I can write for really intensive periods of time. In fact, it's like my favorite thing to do. And I feel like this book was very much created in those sort of like intensive, like focus, long, if I'm rolling, I can be hours and hours and hours and hours and hours that I'm just, at the computer and really, really deep in it. But this book has been written over the course of, our theater company and a lot of other creative projects, written over the course of my child being born and parenting. And in fact, I signed with my agent like literally days after my child was born. And so I was still really ignorant. And she's like, well, I'm gonna want you to do some revisions before we start submitting it. I'm like, oh yeah, that should be no problem. I have a newborn, like they just sleep, right?
Yeah, until they wake up.
My child didn't sleep. So at that point, so my writing kind of shifts depending on where I am. In that period of time, a good chunk of this book was written between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. Very atmospheric time, actually. I would say it's very dark, and, the world is very quiet. And yeah, that would be when I'd be like tapping away, and suddenly like I'd hear it, you hear a noise. I was like up on the third floor of my house in Beacon at that point, like tapping away. But it sort of shifts and flows all over the place, really depending on what else is going on. I'm always working to try and give myself a really regular writing routine, and failing constantly, but I will continue to work towards it.
Is this your favorite genre? Are you going
so.
to stay in this?
Yeah, I am. I love it. I mean, I love Tana French. I love police procedurals. I don't know that I could write one, but I love different sort of versions of this genre. But yeah, there's something about this that I really it's just so fun. That idea of how to build suspense, how to create tension, and how to kind of like hold that through the storyline. It's fun. So yeah, I think I will definitely stay in this territory.
Good. What are some of the authors, or if you have specific books that have kind of inspired you?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. Well, Tana French, I return to Tana French over and over again. In fact, I'm returning to one of hers right now for like the third or fourth time, because I love the way, I mean, there's tension, there's suspense, there's a whodunit, but there's also like beautiful, I find her writing is really rich, lyrical, literary, which I really, really love. I'm like, I know I'm gonna totally blank, but I have a whole lot of books right over here. There's, oh my goodness, there's so many. So there's an author who also is an Atria author, and her book came out a year before mine, maybe less than a year, Sarah Lang, and she's got an amazing book called Good Neighbors, which I recommend to everybody. And it's so it's not one that I read when I was originally writing, but it's one that I read sort of in the last part, like when I was doing sort of my big final revision for publication. And it's the best word that I can use to describe her writing is that it's filled with menace, right? And she does this thing that I was talking about before, where you take the familiar, you take the recognizable, and you just shift it slightly, and you're just filled with chills. So yeah, writers who can do that. And then I think I usually describe the text as like chewy. I want there to be something to really kind of, I love plot's fun, something I can just whip through in one night. There's something really fun about that. But I also love it if there's like a sentence or something, or a paragraph that just sort of stops me and I have to go back and go, whoa, that's awesome. Like there's so much there. Yeah, so I mean,
I found in what you were writing with these women, this deep, and you really wrote it so beautifully, this deep, sadness and contemplative, and so like I said, it's not just this one thing about the house. Your characters are really rich. Do you think you found kind of your excuse me, I don't know where I put my water. Oh, it's right here. Voice as an author through this book?
I think so. I hope so. I mean, I assume that will probably keep changing a little bit and shifting as I keep writing. I mean, I in some ways kind of hope it does, because I think no matter what you do, whether what you create, you should always be pushing yourself and trying new things. But yeah, I'm happy with, I'm very happy with sort of where I've landed, and want to commit further to that, right? Like even like better sentences, better paragraphs, more tension, I don't know, like all that sort of thing.
Right.
Like, and they're very different things. I used to write poetry, and I've often been told that plays and that sort of thing, that there's sort of a poeticness to what I write, and I like that, but I also don't want something to be, and I hope that I would never do this, but maybe I don't know, like pretty just for the sake of pretty sort of thing, like nice words or that sort of, like there has to be, really what I think is the best poetry is that it's layered, right? That's something that is seemingly such a short line, an image, it's so deep. There's so much there, and I think that's so these writers that I'm talking about, whose work I'm responding to, it kind of is working on multiple layers. So there's a great plot, there's really fascinating characters, but then there's also like thematic ideas metaphor, all that sort of thing that are also working in there, that are giving a richness to the story, this sort of story that I'm going to keep thinking about, right? Those are the ones that you keep chewing over.
Yep.
I keep saying chewing, maybe I'm hungry, sorry.
Do you have a lot of ideas for upcoming things?
Yeah, there's another one that I've started, and it was originally a play that I wrote. And so it's, again, I've lived with these characters for a really long time, though the play is very much sort of just the jumping off point, but it was inspired by an actual crime, something that happened. And I was really intrigued by it. I find myself very interested in not the act of violence itself, but in the ripples that come out years afterwards, the way that sort of this, or sometimes the seemingly small thing can, cause an effect and grow into something really big, because I feel like that's really true to life. I mean, like in this book, what sort of starts it all, when Abby goes into the basement the first time, it's something that happens in the moment, right? It's in the moment, a decision is made in the moment, a decision is made by somebody who is essentially a child, or, a very young teen.
Yeah.
And it's that sort of impetuous, emotionally driven, decision that ripples into decades and into so many, the disintegration of a friendship and this hollow space and all this sort of thing. And so there's something that I find really, I just find that really compelling, because I also think that it's very, very human when we get to this place to try and figure out, how did I get here? And to try and go backwards in our minds and find that starting point, like, oh, if I had just turned right instead of left, sort of thing, right? Maybe it's that sliding doors thing, I don't know, but I find, I just think that that's really, again, really human. We want to know why. We want to know why these things happen, even if there's nothing we can do about them.
Yeah.
So yes, this next book is coming from that idea, and then sort of like growing outwards. There won't be, I don't think there'll be, there might be a creepy house. I don't think there'll be a creepy house, but there's a lake. So there's that. I'm going to move from the forest to water.
Excellent. Nice.
Metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. I think, unless there's something else you want to say, I think we should see if anybody has questions.
I think I'm good.
Yes, we have some great audience questions, and audience members, you can use the Q&A box to put more questions in the chat if you have them. But I'm going to start off, you actually touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to hear more. There's a question from Austin saying you're also a playwright. What was the hardest aspect for you in turning your hand to writing a novel?
Not writing all dialogue. Not writing a 400 word or 400 page play. It was finding the rhythm of dialogue that when you weave in thought. That was for me the something that was really fun to play with, sometimes was challenging to play with, to learn when a dialogue has a sort of rhythm to itself. People are speaking, but we're also thinking, and those are happening simultaneously, but they can't happen simultaneously on the page, because I can't ask you to read. I know some books kind of do it, but you still have to read one and then the other. And so taking a reader through that so that they're able to follow the dialogue and then also follow the thought that maybe going way over here or going way over here, and then come back to the dialogue, and balancing that and doing it in a way that feels really organic and feels unobtrusive, so that as the reader you don't even notice it. That was the biggest challenge. That and what people were wearing.
So we have a question that's actually almost exactly opposite from Katie, asking, was there a positive aspect of the writing or publishing process, big or small, that surprised you?
I didn't know so many people were going to read the book before it came out. And so, but this is something that I'm learning, that I didn't even know what an arc was. I mean, you obviously both do. So it's been so amazing to have people reading it and responding to it. It's such a different experience. So when you do a play, if you get your play produced, then you do what I do. You stand at the back of the audience and you chew on your program in the dark and you watch the audience. And this is a very different thing because the audience, the readers are all over the place and they're at different, they're coming in at different times. And so it's, yeah, it's been really, I mean, scary sometimes and like, hope they like it sort of thing, but also really exhilarating, I think, to have this thing that's also lived in my head for so many years and on my computer, actually several, I've gone through several computers because I've been working on it for so long. And has been this sort of just thing that's always like humming in my head, to have it be out there. So to have people say, Abby, Claire, Octagon House, Mitchell, I'm like, how do you know that? That's, you know, yeah, because you published it.
So the next question came from Mel asking, saying, without giving any spoilers, I was definitely pleasantly surprised by the element of romance in the book, which you don't usually see in thrillers. Did you have any specific thought process behind including that?
I like romance too. It just seemed, I don't know, it felt like we were going in that direction. And then there was also, I think, an editorial note that I got a long time ago. I don't even remember whether like was, hey, dial that up a little bit, dial that up, which was fun to do. Very satisfying. Yeah, I think there's, you know, it's to think about your teenage crush and having that opportunity to come into contact with them again. And yeah, there was something there that felt very, it's always been there. So when I say dial it up, it was a dial up. It wasn't like insert. It felt really right. Claire is a very lonely person. And so her being able to find connection with somebody else who's actually also pretty lonely and has also been impacted by events that happen. I mean, he was there the night that, you know, I don't want to give things away, but so there's something there as well that felt like past and present kind of coming together.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question is from Megan asking, how often did you work on the book during those 10 years from NaNoWriMo to the last draft?
Very sporadically for the first, I don't know, like 6 maybe, because I think at that point I had it printed out. So I had this giant stack of paper and I would take it out and I'd have to reread it. But I actually feel like it's a really good test of any material. If you've put it down for a while and you pick it up and you still like it, to me, that's a really, really good test. Because sometimes when you're writing something, you get really excited about it. It's like, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever, this is just, I'm going to win a Pulitzer. This is amazing. And then you come back to the next day, you're like, maybe not so much, maybe not the Pul, maybe I might, and you've kind of lost the sizzle, the spark. And so being able to like, I would pick it up and I would be like, yeah, okay, this is still compelling to me. And I would, work on it for a little bit, and then something else would happen, like a play or something like that would happen. And so I'd be like, okay, all right, well, I'll just put this over here. And then 10 months later, I would like come back to it and then I have to reread it again. And so there was a lot of that. But once there was a certain point, I couldn't figure out the ending. And there was that was always in my head. And I don't even know where it came from, but there was a point where I figured out an ending. And so I went back to it and finished it because it hadn't been finished. And then after that, I started actually doing more of I focused much more on it. And then I asked my husband to read it, and he very kindly did, because he's very kind that way. And so we were able to talk about it. And so that was the first time I was sort of inviting somebody into this thing that was living in my head and on my computer. And then when I started the process of looking for an agent, you know, as soon as you start bringing other people in, it changes in a good way, I think. And so that's also something that I'm very used to, again, with theater, because theater is, you know, a very collaborative art form. There's a point where you bring people in. So then it really became much more of a focus. And then I went through a bajillion drafts.
Do you have a lot of early readers, or did you for this?
I didn't, no. I had a few for like little bits. And then I have two other writers who did read it, I would say probably about 2 years ago. I think they read it. I sent it to them, you know, and I felt it's a big thing to ask somebody to read a book, right?
Yeah.
It's a big old hunk of words that you're asking someone to spend time reading. But they read it, and we had a really great conversation, and that really helped a lot. My agent was really helpful in giving feedback. I had lots of rejection. But it was usually there was often some feedback within that rejection, and so I was able to also take that in. But I don't have a group of like beta readers, like my 10 best beta readers who I can send things out to. That would be really cool, but I don't.
The next question came in from Barbara, saying, tell us a particularly chewy part of your novel, and sorry to further activate your hunger.
Chewy part of my novel. Oh my goodness. I think anything to do with memory. I'm very fascinated with memory. I tend to write about memory a lot. I'm interested in the ways that memory changes. We can have very different memories of the same event, and those can send two people who are like this off like this. And so there's a lot of points of memory that Claire has really kind of stifled a lot of her memories of this house, and so those are starting to wake up again. Claire has also had some recent trauma, and so there's that as a memory, but it's a very recent memory, and that's also a very different thing. There's the recent memory that is like, it's right there. I know what that is. I don't want to go back there because I know what that is, and going back in. And then there are the memories that rise up out of nowhere and you didn't even realize they were there until they're there. And so, and those are both in the book. And I think maybe because it's just been this lifelong fascination of mine, this like how memory works. And memories are stories that we tell ourselves, and our identity is built out of those and all that sort of thing. So I think it's probably in that, in those sections. Not that it's all a like reflection looking back book. There's some moving forward too, but it's a house with a past, and so the house also has memories. And so it kind of works on a lot of different levels.
Excellent, thank you. Luke would like to know, what are your favorite haunted house tropes, and which of those appear in Beneath the Stairs?
Doors. I think doors. Again, I don't watch haunted house movies because I am too scared of them, but I know the occasional time when I have seen a scary movie, I think the best monsters are the ones that live in your head. The scariest monsters are the ones that live in your head. It's like also the most beautiful people are the ones who are sort of like you create in your head. So the door, this idea, I know, I mean, that's a trope, right? Is the door that kind of slowly like kind of opens and you don't know what's behind it. So that, I mean, I think that's obviously, I mean, it was even in the section that I read, right? The door in this house, this door kind of has a mind of its own. And is the cause of many, many problems and is really, really important. So yeah, and in this house, in the past, when it was inhabited by a family, this door would sometimes keep opening and they would close it and then it would open again and then they would, and so, is that just because of an uneven foundation? Maybe that's not so scary. That's just frustrating. Or is it because there's something down there? So yeah, so I think definitely doors. I mean, basements. I grew up in a really old, my parents still live there, a very old stone farmhouse, and the basement I was always fascinated with it. I was always taking people down there. My mother would always say, "Why are you taking people to the dungeon?" It had like an earth floor and like logs because it was actually the basement, I think, of the house that had been there previously. So it was super old. It had rooms, it had dark corners, and I don't know why, but I was just like a little magnet, like drawn to it. So perhaps that's why there's a somewhat similar basement in this book.
That's actually a perfect segue to a question. I'm going to compound this because a few different audience members have asked something that's sort of similar. So do you ever scare yourself as you're writing?
Yes.
And what particularly scares you? And would you live in a haunted house?
No. No, I would not I would definitely not live in a haunted house. I've been in so again, when I was in Toronto, I was at Ryerson Theatre School, and it was a supposedly haunted building. And I used to be there. I used to stay there really late at night, like doing vocal exercises and monologues. And it would just be me and the janitor. And there were all sorts of stories about that place. And I would definitely get very creeped out. And the first restaurant I ever worked in, also in downtown Toronto, was an old mansion, and it definitely was supposed to have resident, yes, the keg. It was supposed to have resident ghosts. In fact, there was a psychic group that would meet there once a week.
Wow.
And somebody once came to, not to me, thank God, but to another person who was working there, who was like, "There's a little boy on the third floor who's very thirsty." We didn't have a third floor. I mean, we had a third floor, but the third floor was just the staff quarters. So, so I've been in those spaces, but I would definitely I would never live there. And I don't remember the rest of the question. Sorry.
Did you ever scare yourself as you were
writing?
Did
I ever scare myself? Yes. And it was, again, I think you kind of, without even realizing it, I'm writing away and I'm kind of like, and then you hear a sound, right? Houses make noises. I mean, again, I grew up in a very old house. It has its own noises, but yeah, it doesn't take much, honestly. It just takes a little bit of darkness. Again, it's that what you can't see. So yeah, like some, a door closing or a sound outside, or, sometimes sound gets kind of, it's something that's coming from over there, but it's bouncing. So it sounds like it's back there. And so, yes, that happened to me all the time. Also, because I tend to write, even now that I don't have a newborn child, I often tend to write really late at night. So,
When your imagination's going.
Exactly.
We are sadly just about out of time, but I want to wrap up with this lovely question that came in from an anonymous audience member saying, friendship is such a wonderful aspect of this novel. Can you talk about how your relationships with women informed your writing, both the fraught and the lovely parts of female friendship?
Yeah, I mean, at the heart of the book is a friendship, and it's this friendship between Claire and Abby, and it's a very old friendship, and it was a very damaged friendship. I think, my dearest friends are some people who I've known for a really long time. But also, I think the idea of a fractured friendship, a friendship that can happen, a fracture that can sometimes again happen because of something in a particular moment in time. And I think sometimes the friendships that we form when we're young can be so rich, right? And when you realize you've lost them, sometimes you're so far past them that it's hard to go back and try and find them again. And there's a fear that, well, what if it doesn't work, right? What if it was magic when we were 13 or 10 or 20, but now we've just become completely different people, and there's a loss there, right? And no one likes that feeling, so sometimes it's easier to just sort of like, I'll just leave that one. And yet it is this loss because this is this person who is a part of your past, right? And the past is gone. It's in photos and it's in your memory, but these old friends are people who were there. They were there for those experiences, for those heartbreaks, and for that time when you went to that house and all that sort of thing. And that shared experience gives you this familiar territory to work from. So yeah, I mean, I think I value my old friends so much. And I think the loss of an old friend, and as I've said, I've lost old friends too, for one reason or another. And that is a loss that I feel really deeply.
That is a perfect and touching note to end on.
That note.
Jennifer, thank you for celebrating with us today. It's such an honor to get to be here on the release date and to get to celebrate this book with you. And Leslie, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview tonight.
Thank you so much. Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Audience, thank you for being here. And you can order Jennifer and Leslie's books at northshire.com and check out our list of other great upcoming events. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful evening.
Bye.